Peace, family. I'm back with another one. Shout out to the Black Pass for the content I'm about to present. We're gonna go over a few cowboys and cowgirls of the 1800s, and we're gonna start with that. Hit that subscribe button if you're new. If you're a returning viewer, I appreciate you as I always say. And so, without holding y'all, like I said, I'm gonna do another giveaway once I hit 500 subs. Help me run these videos up. But we're gonna jump straight into it.
On behalf of Akuno Sankofa Bay, you know what I'm saying? Jay, where you at? We're trying to help our people elevate. Hope. H-O-P-E. We're giving them hope. We doing what we gotta do, you know? Every day, one step at a time, man. We gonna make it happen. Helping our people elevate. Sometimes I practice focused thought and meditate. I'm trying to come with other ways to help our people elevate and seeking knowledge, make me levitate. The lifted mental state is what results from how we orchestrate. This for the family's sake. Let's self-reflect and self-evaluate. And every day, make sure the steps you take, you calculate. Receive a master's fate. I know I can't exist without the hate, but that's okay. I balance that with higher self today. Success is on this way, and after that, my flesh can pass away.
Bash Reeves, 1838 to 1910. Bash Reeves was the first African-American commissioned to serve as a deputy U.S. Marshal west of the Mississippi River. Born a slave in Paris, Texas, and owned by George Reeves, Bash Reeves grew up illiterate and remained illiterate for his entire life. When the Civil War began, George Reeves, Bass's owner, joined the Confederate Army, taking Bass with him. It is unclear how and exactly when Bash Reeves left his owner, but at some point during the Civil War, he gained his freedom. One account recalls how Bash Reeves and his owner had an altercation over a card game. Reeves severely beat his owner and fled to the Indian Territory, where he lived as a fugitive slave among the Creek and Seminoles. After the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, Reeves, now free, moved to Van Buren, Arkansas, where he bought land and worked as a farmer and stockman. He married Nellie Jenny, a Texan, and fathered 10 children, 5 boys and 5 girls. On May 10, 1875, President Ulysses S. Grant appointed Isaac C. Parker as the judge for the Federal Western District Court at Fort Smith, Arkansas, a jurisdiction that included the Indian Territory. Parker, in turn, appointed a U.S. Marshal and authorized him to hire 200 deputies to curb the rampant lawlessness that had terrorized the region. Because of his knowledge of the area and fluency in the Creek and Seminole languages, Reeves was recruited to work as a deputy U.S. Marshal in the Indian Territory. For the next 32 years, Bash Reeves brought to justice over 3,000 criminals and killed 14 outlaws during his years as a marshal, garnering a reputation as one of the most successful lawmen in the Indian Territory. Among those he captured was Bob Dozier, a murderer and a cattle and horse thief, who eluded Reeves for several years before being tracked down and killed after refusing to surrender. He also tracked outlaws Tom Story for 5 years between 1884 and 1889, finally killing him in a gunfight. Bash Reeves was noted for his even-handedness, honesty, and integrity. He tracked down and arrested his own son after a 2-week manhunt. The son, wanted for the murder of his wife, was tried and convicted, but later given a full pardon. Reeves also arrested his church minister for selling illegal alcohol. Since he was illiterate, Reeves often memorized warrants that were read to him by the federal judge or other court officials. Reeves was also skilled at disguising himself and taking on other aliases to assist his apprehension of criminals. An excellent marksman, Reeves was an imposing law enforcement officer at 6'2". Bash Reeves' legendary career as a U.S. Marshal ended in 1907, when the new state of Oklahoma assumed policing duties over the Indian Territory. At the age of 69, Reeves became a policeman for the city of Muskogee. He worked there for 2 years before failing health forced his retirement. Bash Reeves died on January 10, 1910 in Muskogee, Oklahoma. He was 72 at the time of his death. Bill Pucket, 1870-1932. Bill Pickett, the Dusky Demon, was of Indian/Black descent, Texas-born, and seemingly destined for the saddle. At birth, he was just another cowboy. By the time of his death, Pickett was the most famous Black cowboy entertainer in American history. The slightly built man transformed himself from a homely ranch lad into a performer who appeared in silent movies and in stage production throughout the United States and England as a trick roper, bull rider, and steer wrestler. With the Miller Brothers 101 Ranch and Wild West show from Ponca City, Oklahoma. Along the way, he created the sport of steer wrestling or bulldogging and set a standard for theatrical savvy and skills in the saddle, and that applies even to this day. Not surprisingly, he was a friend and confidant of Tom Mix, arguably the most popular cowboy movie star of his time. Comedian, radio and movie star, and trick roper Will Rogers appeared with Pickett on many occasions and counted the Black cowboy among his finest or closest friends. Bill Pickett never seemed to tire of his theatrical adventures in the saddle, appearing at literally hundreds of small and large rodeo events throughout the East and West. It is an interesting commentary on the times, however, that Madison Square Garden banned his appearances. Pickett's widely popular performances embedded the images of a Black cowboy in this nation's mass media culture, one which existed until this time. Pickett was the first Black man to be inducted into the Cowboy Hall of Fame in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. His image decorates one of the most famous and collectible postage stamps ever issued by the U.S. Postal Service. His image of the indefatigable, skilled, charismatic, crowd-pleasing cowboy set standards which influenced all of his successors and helped mass audiences redefine what Black men had accomplished in the real American West. Mary Fields of 1832 to 1914. Born enslaved in Tennessee, this girl came west with Ursuline nuns after being freed. Not known for her quiet temperament, she left the convent in her teens and became, in time, a restaurant owner in several towns in Montana, Wyoming, and Alberta and Saskatchewan, Canada. A cigar-smoking madam, the second woman to drive U.S. mail coach, earning the appellation Shotgun Mary, a notorious brawler and one of the most notorious women of her time. The muscular 6-foot-tall woman drew attention wherever she ventured as she constantly reinvented herself as an entrepreneur and as once seen never to be forgotten individual. Little was known of Phil's life aside of the businesses she established and her reputation as a woman who would do whatever it took to succeed in the cold barrens of the northern high country. Retiring to a placid life of gardening in Cascade, Montana, she was befriended by Gary Cooper, the actor who, as a child, grew up with her as a neighbor. Cooper spoke and wrote fondly of her. Given the limitations society placed upon her by virtue of her skin color and sex, she stands out as both a unique individual and as a woman who was far ahead of her time in setting new standards for strong women in tough times. Nat Love of 1854 to 1921. Born the son of slaves in Davidson County, Tennessee in 1854, Nat Love grew up during the turbulent Civil War and Reconstruction era. Rare for African-American born enslaved in that era, Love learned to read and write as a child. In 1869, he left Tennessee and moved west to Texas. For the next 20 years, Love worked as a drover, moving cattle and horses in various locations, including the Texas Panhandle, Kansas, Arizona Territory, and Dakota Territory. In 1889, Love married a woman named Alice, and the couple had one child. In 1890, he began work as a porter for the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad, a job he held for the next 15 years. As Love recounted the stories of the earlier life as a drover to both passengers and other railroad workers, he was encouraged to write his life's history. He did so in 1907 in an autobiography titled The Life and Adventures of Nat Love, better known in the cattle country as Deadwood Dick. Love bragged about his exploits as a superior cowboy and rodeo performer and recounted how he earned the name Deadwood Dick along with the love and respect of the citizens of Deadwood, Dakota Territory. Love accounts describe his meeting legendary Westerns such as Buffalo Bill Cody. In the 1890s, Edward L. Wheeler, a dime novelist, wrote more than 30 books about a hero named Deadwood Dick. Love claimed that these novels were about him, placing his accounts similarly with those of the protagonists of the Deadwood Dick series. Though Love's autobiography claims numerous hyperboles and exaggerated claims, it does offer an insight into the life of one man in the 19th century American West. Nate Love died in Los Angeles, California at the age of 67. Mary Ellen Pleasant of 1814 to 1904. Mary Ellen Pleasant was born on August 19, 1814 in Virginia and spent her early years in Nantucket, Massachusetts. She worked as a bondservant to the Hussey family, an abolitionist family. She later married James Smith, a wealthy former plantation owner and an abolitionist. Mary Ellen and James worked on the Underground Railroad. After Smith's death 4 years later, Mary Ellen continued her work as a conductor on the Underground Railroad. Mary Ellen married John James Pleasant around 1848. To avoid trouble with slavers for abolitionist work, the couple moved to San Francisco, California in April 1852. Miss Pleasant established several restaurants for California miners, the first named the Case and Heiser. With the help of clerk Thomas Bell, Miss Pleasant amassed a fortune by 1875 through her investments of various businesses by 1875. She also helped to establish the first Bank of California. Pleasant earned her title as the mother of California's early civil rights movement, establishing the local Underground Railroad. She financially supported John Brown from 1857 to 1859. In the 1860s and 1870s, Miss Pleasant brought several civil rights lawsuits in California, especially against the trolley companies, most of which she owned. During the 1880s, a smear campaign by the widow of Thomas Bell damaged Miss Pleasant's reputation. Local newspapers began to taunt her with the projective title, Mammy, which she reportedly hated. She never recovered her prestige from this campaign. Mary Ellen Pleasant died on January 4th, 1904. Black cowboys in the 19th century West through the 1850s and 1900s. The earliest evidence of African Americans as cattle herders, cowboys, in North America can be traced back to colonial South Carolina, where stock grazers from what is now known as Senegal and West Africa were specifically brought to that colony because of their unique skills. They were brought to Spanish American colonies from Mexico to Argentina for similar reasons. Over the decade, the cattle industry and enslaved Africans who worked it migrated across the South and reached Texas by the 1850s. With 1/3 of the state's population comprising enslaved workers, African Americans were the majority of cowboys in Texas in the early 1850s. Enslaved cowboys were assigned the task of catching and tending wild cattle in the Gulf Coast brush country. Working with vaqueros who migrated north from Mexico, these herders often drove long trains of steers led by oxen and trailed by baying dogs. Francis Richard Lubbock, the Civil War governor of Texas, relied on his 5 bondsmen to tend the 2,000 cattle of his ranch near Houston, Texas. Lubbock allowed one slave named Willis to acquire cattle and horses to purchase his freedom for himself and his family. James Taylor White, the first Texas cattle baron, used African-American drovers for the thousands of cattle he owned in Liberty County, Texas. As early as 1854, Amanda Wiley depended on African-American slave cowboys to tend to her herd or cattle. Notable post-Civil War cowboys included Pete Staples, a former Texas slave who joined the first cattle drivers to Kansas, and Bose Eckert, who worked the Goodnight Loving Trails from Texas to Denver. Jim Perry was one of the black cowboys on the 3 Million Acre Ranch in the Texas Panhandle, while Daniel Wallace, who invented the cattle brand that became his middle name, became Texas' most successful black rancher. As the range cattle industry expanded out of Texas after the Civil War, black cowboys moved across the West along with it, working in every state and territory in the region, with the largest number in Arizona Territory, California, Nevada, and New Mexico Territory. In Arizona Territory, African Americans John Swain and John Batavia worked for former Texas Ranger John Slaughter on his ranch near Tombstone. Thornton Biggs worked in northern Colorado. Print Olive worked in Nebraska. Nat Love in the Dakota Territory. Ex-Texan Henry Harris became foreman on the Elko County Ranch of Nevada Governor John Sparks. Even future President Theodore Roosevelt employed one black cowboy on his Dakota Territory ranch. 4 African-American cowboys in New Mexico Territory were involved in the Lincoln County Range War of 1878 that produced William Bonney, aka Billy the Kid. 3 black cowboys, George Washington, George Robinson, and Zebrian Bates, rode with Bonney and his regulators, while African Americans John Clark worked for his businessman rancher Lawrence Murphy. Over the decades, African Americans, although still present, became smaller and smaller percentage of herders and drovers as whites moved into the industry. By 1890, the 473 African American cowboys in Texas comprised only 3% of the total number in the state. Overall, black cowboys were about 2% of the total in the West by that date, as these workers sought better paying employment in the other industries. Let me know if y'all were already familiar with this information, if y'all weren't. But if you connecting the dots, well, I'm just letting y'all know, like the term cowboy before it became something famous, it was for black slaves to work the barns, go fetch that cowboy, and I'll catch y'all on the next one. Peace and love, family.